Hello and welcome to a new episode of the Cradle News Roundup, your one-stop shop for all news West Asia. My name is Esteban Carrillo. I am the news editor for the Cradle, and as usual, I'm joined by my colleagues, content creator and writer for the Cradle, Karim Shami, and columnist and editor for the Cradle, Sharmeen Narwani. And as usual, before we start, we just want to remind you to please to leave a like, to share this video, to subscribe to our channel, to find us on our social media platforms, and to please check out our Patreon, where you can become a supporter of the Cradle and help us continue doing the work that we do here. So today we start with the funeral of the late Hezbollah leader Hassan Nasrallah, which saw hundreds of thousands gather in Beirut on Sunday. The figures range between a million and 1.5 million people present for this event. A truly impressive display of resistance, right? I think this is the correct word here. A day that went thankfully without any bad things happening. But we did see, Israeli overflights during the funeral. We did see Israeli provocations. And well, we saw also the response from the Lebanese crowd, right? And the crowd from over 80 nations, according to organizers as well, that flooded into Lebanon. We'll get into that because I know, you guys were present. And, without further ado, what do we make about what happened yesterday and about the Israeli response, right? What they attempted to do.
Look, it was a absolutely once in a lifetime kind of scene. I mean, certainly bigger than anything I've ever witnessed. And the fact that it was a funeral, I mean, you felt that you were watching a once in a lifetime goodbye to a very beloved leader. Normal leaders of countries never, ever see funerals like that. They never have the masses participate. They're usually really large ceremonies for dignitaries from around the world, but you don't see the masses, do you? And to
Not
think
to this
that,
amount, because, I'm sure they will be putting the images now. And you're talking about a sea of people, an actual,
no,
sea of
I mean, whether it was Abe who was killed in Japan, or the point is, like, you don't have a million people show up, or 2 or 3
Yeah.
or 4 million people show up for funerals like this. It's usually reserved for dignitaries, and everything is secured to the point where, of course, people can't participate. In this case, it was a funeral for the people. The service was for the people.
Yes.
Not for the organization, not for dignitaries. It was for the people. And that was really, really apparent from the moment you stepped into the stadium, if you were lucky enough to get into the stadium, which I was as a member of the media. And I had 2 Cradle columnists by my side. One is Pepe Escobar, and the other is Mohammed Hassan Soidan. And we were, Mohammed is from Lebanon and he knows the scene very well. But Pepe, who has, had a 40-plus year career, veteran journalist, lived and traveled to most countries around the world in these 40 years, a true vagabond journalist, was just, speechless to see these kind of people. So, this amount of people. And throughout the, we got in fairly early, around, well, not that early, around 10:30.
People
And
were lining up overnight, since the night
they
before
were,
to go to the stadium.
yeah, they were staying overnight. Just to mention, the weather was, it was quite frigid in Lebanon. We've had a very, very cold week, and the forecast for yesterday was somewhere between 1 and 8 degrees. People came with umbrellas and heavy coats and stuff, and expecting showers as well as cold. And like the skies opened up, we had nothing but sunshine, from the moment we started that morning till well into the day. And it was like the sun shone on the ceremony. That's all I can say. It was notable for people who were expecting the worst and yet were prepared to come out in those numbers, even in freezing rain, the feeling there was, it's extraordinary to be part of anything that big, the coming together of people with similar sentiments or even paying respects. It was a very, very solemn thing. Now, from the beginning, there were segments in this large stadium that were chanting, and some of the chants would then be picked up by everyone in the stadium, which was this resounding volume. It was incredible to be there. I mean, forget the Super Bowl. We saw, like,
Also on
maximum.
it.
Yeah, seriously, what the Americans do annually, like we had this that day plus much more. And then when the overflights happened, the first one was interesting because nobody knew exactly, it was quite fast. And everyone looked up, and then immediately the chanting started. I mean, nobody was startled. Nobody jumped out of their skin. They just, stuck their fists in the air, and the chants were like death to Israel, to Lavek Nasrallah.
At
At your service, Nasrallah. I mean, everyone was chanting their own thing. But the second time the overflight happened, maybe 30 minutes later or so, people were openly laughing and mocking it. I think the sentiment was like, that's all you can do. I feel for a country that has lost the sense and power of deterrence that it had experienced for, almost 2 decades, and really lost the feeling that, or really have been sensing in the last months that deterrence has been lost. Yesterday felt like full restoration of deterrence because that's all the enemy could do. That's all they could do. They had, collectively the biggest gathering of resistance supporters and leaders that this region is likely to see for a very, very long time. And all they could do was this piddly little, we're going to scare you thing. And the reaction was quite the opposite. It was so counterproductive for the Israelis. It made them look weak. It made them look cowardly. It made them look petty, infantile, and foolish. And so the second overflights were just met with cheers and jeers and laughter. And that was something to behold, truly, being
I
right in
think
the
I
center
just
of
want to
it.
add something. Well, two things. One is what you're saying, right? That like this sea of humanity from around the world arrives in Beirut despite attempts to block them, right? Because I think this is one of the reasons why we saw the cancellation of Iranian flights, and we also heard that Iraqi flights, flights from Iraq, were being there were hurdles put in front of them, right? Before they would arrive in Beirut. And the other thing I wanted to mention was, I said this is a huge display of resistance, and I think, the reaction to the overflights, as you said, barely a person shook in their boots. Nobody, ran for the exits or anything like that. And you need to consider that the area where this funeral was took place, right, the Camille Chamoun Sports City Stadium, which is essentially between the airport, the Beirut airport, and Dahieh, right, the southern suburbs of Beirut. This is where the bombs were dropping for weeks on end on a daily basis. This is nearby where Israel actually killed Hassan Nasrallah by dropping 80 bunker buster bombs, each weighing a ton. So you're talking about 160,000 pounds of explosives just dropped, down the street a few months ago from where this funeral is happening. And yet you see all of these people gather, and when the Israeli planes fly overhead, they either start chanting death to Israel or they laugh at them. And I think that's, incredible. It's incredible. Nobody could have
Yeah.
seen this coming.
No, but it's so funny. These overflights just galvanize the crowds like crazy. I think the other moment of, intense momentum and feeling was when the caskets of Sayyid Hassan Nasrallah and Sayyid Hashim Safiuddin came out, were first visible to the eye inside the stadium, and then made their way around. So it's like a normal sports stadium, and there was an oval, almost like imagine a jogging path. The width of that was unobstructed. So very slowly, the funeral, the caskets covered with the Hezbollah yellow flag and insignia went around this, this unobstructed path very, very slowly, so that people on either side could throw and this was something I hadn't seen before, and it was quite touching. They were throwing everything, scarves, their jackets, their hats, at the men, at the Hezbollah guards, I guess, who were protecting the caskets, who themselves spent the entirety of this time grabbing at any of these possessions that people were throwing at them. Instead of worrying about security, they were not at all worried. They were grabbing the possessions people were throwing at them and rubbing it on the caskets and then throwing it back to them. People just wanted anything that could be close to the last minutes, overground of the two secretary generals of Hezbollah. And it was very, very moving. It doesn't matter what your beliefs were or whatever, you could see that this was, again, the thing about it is, state funerals are just not for the masses. And this was the masses. And let's talk numbers now. I don't mean the numbers who showed up, but what we're hearing is that this was a good quarter of Lebanon's entire population. A quarter, okay, of a country's entire population showed up. I mean, that's insane.
It's a quarter of the population, not the elderly population, يعني with babies and with elderly people. يعني people
Yeah.
that
People brought the grandparents, they brought the kids. Everyone came. A quarter. Is that the biggest ever? I don't know. Like, what other world leader can you imagine?
I think it is the biggest, because I don't think any world leader can be matched by Sayyid Hassan Nasrallah. Nobody did for his country what Sayyid Hassan Nasrallah did for his country. We're talking about what happened yesterday, but we have to tell the people who is Sayyid Hassan Nasrallah for me as a Lebanese person. When I grew up, when I started to understand the world around me, I was like 9 years old, and I knew that Israel occupies around 11% of my country. Everybody, even people that hate Israel or against Israel, nobody thought that Lebanon will be liberated. Only one man was talking about that, and it was Sayyid Hassan Nasrallah. Until the year 2000, his work and, of course, the man that believed in him were able to liberate Lebanon. Nobody else. Nobody, even the people that were willing to fight Israel, thought that this will happen. This man made it. And let us not forget what happened in Syria in 2011 till 2016-17. If people just go to the map and look and see how big is Iraq and Syria, if you compare it to Lebanon, and just acknowledge that Daesh or ISIS was able to spread in these two countries, but they were not able to enter Lebanon, although their ultimate goal was to enter Lebanon. And the guy that prevented this to happen is Sayyid Hassan Nasrallah. And Lebanon is very small and it's very fragile. And Daesh or ISIS were not able to enter Lebanon because of this man. Not to mention that he protected even Christians and minorities overseas in Syria and other places. We know all that ISIS and before ISIS and the Americans, I don't know why, but they don't want Christians in this region. And the man who stood against this is Sayyid Hassan Nasrallah. There's more Christians in West Asia because one man who is Sayyid Hassan Nasrallah. And when everybody abandoned Gaza, Sayyid Hassan Nasrallah stood within less than 24 hours, missiles started to fire and to be launched from South Lebanon into Israel because he stood with Gaza and with Hamas. And let's not forget something that even Hamas didn't do, is when Saudi Arabia launched its unethical war on Yemen, only one guy stood against Saudi Arabia, and it's Sayyid Hassan Nasrallah. One guy. Even Hamas didn't have the balls to comment on it. Nobody, even Bashar al-Assad when he was in power, nobody, even Saudi Arabia, took a lot of time and diplomacy to talk about it. But Sayyid Hassan Nasrallah, since day one, he said that this is an ethical war and this is a Western war against the Yemenis. These are small things to mention. And we can go back to Albania and to Kosovo, and he was even present there. And of course, everybody portrayed him as a terrorist, even though he's not. Yani, you won't see a person who's under the leadership of Sayyid Hassan Nasrallah who committed any crime. It's completely the opposite.
He's an
So
icon
this is
of the
worth to
anti-colonial
mention.
struggle, for the entire world. I think that's one of the reasons why we saw that amount of people and that amount of love. I think in social media also, right? Because the funeral was not just celebrated at the stadium in Beirut; it was celebrated across the world on social media platforms. And you saw this, right? This recognition of what the colonialist mindset will never understand, right? That when you kill a person of such importance, you don't kill the idea. You just turn him into a legend. You turn him into an icon. Some people are talking about the Lebanon enters the post Nasrallah era. I think actually, the world is entering the Nasrallah as something more than a man era.
Yeah, and I just want to point viewers to our feature today, who was also written by on Nasrallah's funeral and the events of yesterday, also written by Lebanese Khalil Harb, who was the longtime editor, a foreign editor of Asafir, one of Lebanon's oldest publications. And it just goes to show that whatever you thought of or think of the resistance movement and whatever your politics are, that this man had a big impact. And Khalil Harb points out that there were attendees from, I think, 70 or 80 nations there. And as a result, it felt like a gathering of the global South, that when these collective fists from 80 different countries were in the air, they were fists joined in against universal injustice, that it resonated through every single foreign participant who was there, because they were thinking of injustice in their own world, in their own countries. But to quickly go back to what we were just talking about the attendees and the numbers and the percentages, the Cradle did their own, we're seeing this on social media, people are doing their own estimates on crowds, but to put into perspective population-wise, because Lebanon is only about 4 or 5 million people, remember that. Mahatma Gandhi's funeral, which attracted around 2 million people, and we're counting populations at the time of these funerals, represented only about 0.5% of India's population. Similarly, Pope John Paul II's state funeral saw 4 million participants, which was approximately 7% of Italy's population. Gamal Abdel Nasser's memorial, the Arab nationalist leader, who I think is probably the last Arab leader who invoked such widespread popular sentiment, his memorial gathered an estimated 3 million people, at the time about 6.97% of Egypt's populace. Then you had the funerals of former Iranian Supreme Leader Ruhollah Khomeini, the father of the Iranian Islamic Revolution, and Quds Force commander, who was assassinated by the Americans, Qasem Soleimani. They drew even larger crowds in absolute terms, around 7 million people each. But these numbers accounted for 12.6% and 7.7% of Iran's population, respectively, which highlights the extraordinary proportional turnout at Nasrallah's funeral. 25%.
And the funny thing is that the current Lebanese politicians and the new government is acting as if Hezbollah doesn't exist anymore. And this is very, 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 I think, dangerous. Before, it's very weird, yeah.
I want to say not anymore. That I'm so glad you brought that up, Ken, because yesterday when we were heading out to the meeting points for the funeral, I think I left my home around 9 a.m. The streets everywhere were empty. It was just, Sundays, people get up, they go out with family, they go to church, whatever. You do see, it's quieter than most days, but not like this. You could hear a pin drop. There were just like little gatherings of Lebanese soldiers scattered here and there, a car here and there. That's how empty it was. And it continued to be empty, even driving back way later in the day. The streets were empty. It was as though the other part of Lebanon's population went indoors thinking something's bad's going to happen, thinking maybe there will be chaos, maybe Israel will bomb, maybe Hezbollah will get furious and start firing on us, like ridiculous things. Like, what were they afraid of? Pepe, who was, Pepe Escobar, a columnist who was with me, was saying, oh my God, the nicest, most polite, most respectful people in there, where you could have had stampedes and everyone gave space. Everyone was respectful. And he made a comment about it, which stuck with me because I've been here a long time. And he said, I didn't expect that. And then also surprised at the fact that Beirut was entirely empty. So the other thing, Karim, I think you can also probably speak to, which is notable, is the fact that Lebanon's new president, who was selected on the basis of Hezbollah and Amal, okay, the Shia duo, as they call them, their votes, didn't show up. Neither did the new Lebanese Prime Minister, Nawaf Salam, nothing. Gibran Bassil, who, the Free Patriotic Movement, which is the biggest Christian political party at the time in 2006, formed an alliance with Hezbollah. And Gibran Bassil, who heads the party now, was a no-show. He sent a tweet, okay? It's just, so you're right.
Embarrassing.
It's embarrassing. Like literally you can see Lisa Johnson, the US ambassador, went in and locked Joseph Owen's bedroom door and Nawaf Salam's bedroom door and kept them hostage there.
It's expected.
Yeah, it was embarrassing, and then the Israeli overflights. Now, Joseph Aoun, the president, was until recently the commander of the Lebanese armed forces. And this happens on this day. I mean, what a bunch of friggin' cowards. And these guys talk about sovereignty left, right, and center. It's like when the Americans talk about freedom and democracy, or freedom and democracy, as I call it, is exactly what it's like to have a Lebanese president and prime minister talk about sovereignty. Their sovereignty lies at the doorstep of the American embassy, okay? They dropped it off and they never picked it up like an umbrella you forgot to take out. Literally the most shameful display.
Umbrella is useful.
Umbrellas, sovereignty would be useful if the president, prime minister of a country would even recognize what that was. Stunning. I mean, literally, you want to skippy smack these idiots. They look like idiots today. They look like monumental idiots who hid at home, who were cowards, who left sovereignty at the door, left honor and dignity at the door. Honor and dignity are the words that the Arab people, the Arab masses were using at the beginning of the Arab Spring, which the Americans and Hollywood quickly, and the mass media quickly turned into freedom and democracy. They never talked about freedom and democracy. They talked about honor and dignity. And yesterday, there was no honor and dignity in Baghdad Palace. There was no honor and dignity at the Prime Minister's residence. It was an embarrassment for Lebanon. It was an embarrassment. If they were in front of me right now, ooh.
What do you think, Karim?
Yeah, I think what they did is expected. I didn't expect them, and I was not shocked, but I was not shocked that the patriotic movement or At-Tayyar did attempt. I think this is one of the biggest mistakes that Hezbollah did in recent history and in the recent elections. Hezbollah lost some seats because they handed some seats to the patriotic movement, and the patriotic movement failed to collect the needed ballots. So Hezbollah now, they don't have the majority in the parliament because of this patriotic movement. And Said Hassan said, they are our allies, and he talked to his people, which I am part of them. It's okay, let's sacrifice these 2 or 3 seats. But now these 3 or 4 seats are very important to the country and to Hizb especially. And as if this movement, which is headed by Gibran Bassil, they don't acknowledge this. This is a disgrace for Gibran Bassil. I don't care about my president or my prime minister. They will only last like maybe 1 year for the next elections.
Until next
and
election.
as I said before, the president of Lebanon is nothing. He's like just a photo that they hang in official offices. He has zero power. So that's a disgrace. And of course, the people that attended, they are people that know what is Sayyid Hassan Nasrallah. He's the most important Lebanese person who ever lived. We have famous people in Lebanon, but nobody matches him. And it's his funeral, and he didn't die normally. He was assassinated by an enemy that occupies Lebanon right now, or parts of Lebanon right now, and you don't attend and you name yourself as an official or a person who loves Lebanon. That's a disgrace. That's a disgrace. So, and also people don't know, because you have to live in Lebanon to know this fact. For instance, there's many places in Lebanon that usually they are normal places. You don't see a flag, you don't see even a Lebanese flag. When Sayyid Hassan was assassinated, and when the outcome of the war was not positive for Hezbollah, now you see old parties or people who are aligned with Israel now on the streets. They are raising these flags, although they didn't participate in the war. I just want to mention this out. When Hezbollah is weakened a little bit or is weakened, now you see these people uprising, and of course they have media. And today I read many articles. They are saying that only 200,000 or 150,000 people attended to the funeral, and it's funny. It's not funny. It's evil. I think it's evil. Yani Sayyid Hassan is a bonus to this country. What happened yesterday is a bonus to this country. I asked a friend, or I used to consider him as a friend, but he has no problem with Israel, and he was against the funeral yesterday. I told him, do you know, when you go outside Lebanon and maybe people know that you're Lebanese, they will approach you because they will think that you support the Palestinian and Hezbollah and not Israel. You know what I mean? Yani, for instance, if people know about Lebanon, they will approach you as a guy who is trustworthy, a guy who sacrificed for his country. Do you consider yourself a Lebanese? Again, it's a disgrace, and nobody will know who is the president of Lebanon, the current president, or Nawaf Salam, but everybody till the end of times will know who is Sayyid Hassan Nasrallah.
Yeah, but I have to say, Hezbollah Secretary General, when he spoke yesterday,
Naim Qassem.
Naim Qassem was, I don't know if it was particularly moving to anyone. I felt like, I always felt when Nasrallah spoke, I learned something. Or I learned, at least when he didn't say anything, that he was not prepared to say things. Do you know what I mean? His silence spoke volumes as well. It wasn't just his words and his revelations. I don't feel that with Naim Qassem. It's okay. Nobody can step into the shoes of a great communicator. It's not possible to learn those traits, But this has to be addressed quite quickly by Hezbollah, because people are used to, nevertheless, getting information in a systematic, regular way, an inspiring one, inspiring messages, answers to questions, untying the machinations and schemes of the region, explaining who the parties are and what can be expected. These are things that are missing. And Naim Qassem spoke, very vaguely, with a lot of platitudes. Israel cannot continue its occupation and aggression. He said the most
He
important
expressed support
step.
for the army too, and for the government.
Yeah, but this is what I was going to say next, actually.
He's
The
talking
most-
like a politician.
Yeah, exactly. The most important step we have taken is for the Lebanese state to assume its responsibilities. It's Naim Qassem is okay. I don't know what their plans are. Okay, but right now that's not working, and this is too much of the moderate face of Hezbollah, the well-mannered, the well-groomed, the well-behaved face. Please, for God's sakes, does the idea of resistance against an aggressor, an armed aggressor, has
occupier.
always been, there is peaceful resistance and there is armed resistance. Hezbollah is armed resistance. The French resistance was armed resistance against the Nazis, right? The thing is, if you're armed resistance and you're not willing to fire at the enemy, what are you? Then say you're something else. But who are these well-mannered men with guns? I mean, it's a big disappointment, Like, I've railed for a long time against, the resistance axis being too complacent, thinking, we have deterrence in all military ways except in the assassination, right? No deterrence in assassinations. If they kill you, kill one of them back. How are you armed resistance without this notion? Don't tell me it's insurmountable when you had 19 years in which to figure out a way, So I feel like, to be honest, and this is probably not because of Naim Qassem's and his platitudes and his blah, 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 blah speech, but at that point, I looked up and I saw big chunks of the stadium emptied out. To be fair, Naim Qassem spoke after the turn of Nasrallah and Safiuddin's caskets and before it headed onto the streets for people to then follow it to their resting places. So many people in the stadium probably left to follow the procession behind the caskets, but nonetheless, it was an emptier stadium when Naim Qasim spoke. And for me, it felt like there was no reason for them to be there. It was just Naim Qasim, and we don't
bit
hear
of a
anything new from
premonition,
him. Again, this is not to put him down or to, who else could fill the slot, but he's not saying anything that people are needing to hear. And the people found their answers among each other yesterday. And the people faced down the Israeli aggression in the skies with jeers and laughter and cries louder. I am thinking the pilots over the sounds of their own fighter jets must have heard the jeers. They were so loud. We are in a new phase. For sure, Lebanon, that had the part of Lebanon that had slowly wiped out the resistance after the ceasefire, slowly erased them, and their well-behaved antics, erased them slowly as though they didn't exist, got a reality shock on Sunday, as we discussed in last week's podcast. That depends on the crowds on Sunday. They got a reality check. If these guys came out every Friday, even half or a quarter the amount, Aoun and Salam would act. Do you know what I mean? Maybe it's up to the people to remind the resistance what they need to be like. I don't know, but we are potentially in a new phase in Lebanon. Reality check has been had. Will they be smart enough to keep their presence remembered every single minute of every single day in Lebanon as a ministerial statement is released, as government policies are released, as financial reforms are released? Will the resistance be part of every one of those decisions? That depends on how much the Lebanese resistance is willing to put its stamp. It has the mandate as of Sunday. Will it rise to the occasion? I don't know.
I think it will remain like this because Sayyid Hassan Nasrallah used to say in his speeches, at least every now and then, and he used to say, my people or the people that surrounds me, they said that don't say this, but I will say it. They told me not to name this, but I will name it. They are more diplomatic, and I think nobody can replace Sayyid Hassan Nasrallah, and I think it's a mistake, but it will remain a mistake because it's a feeling and a thoughts that we want somebody like Sayyid Hassan Nasrallah, but it will never come. And even if they replace Naim Qasim, I think nobody can come and replace Sayyid Hassan Nasrallah. I think I can say that he's one of the smartest people in the world. I'm not talking about politics. I mean in general, just a person you can talk to and have a conversation. I think he was one of the smartest, and it's very, very difficult to replace him. And as you said, Sharmeen, I'm afraid of one thing, that they won't be able to know how to act in internal politics.
Naim Qasim did say one thing that I liked, and it's actually the final line in Khalil Bharb's article from today. To those who claim sovereignty, wake up. It's exactly...
Sharmeen, for instance, people that I know and I see on daily basis, the sovereignty for them is to be allies with the United States. It's not about waking up. It's about what they want. They are fed and the media, and they think that, okay, if we are allies with
the US.
with the United States, we will be Germany in 1 month, or we will be like London in 1 month. That's what they think. And they say it. It's not I'm not like telling you what I think they say. They say it. No,
Where I'm from is exactly the same.
Sorry, I said Germany and London. They literally say will be a second Dubai. That is implemented and engraved in their brains. That will be like this. And I always answer them the same answer. I tell them that Egypt were the first to normalize with Israel. They are now normalizing about since 50 years. And sorry to say that, but till now, the lowest wages in Lebanon are paid for the Egyptians that come overseas. So I don't know how they see that we will be like Dubai, for instance.
No, it's a problem.
It's implemented. It's engraved in their heads that Hezbollah is preventing this. And now there's no Hezbollah. We are now a free country. We can go to the Americans. That's their mentality. And we can make businesses and money. That's what they expect. And I'm sure now When it doesn't happen, because it's engraved, they believe it, they will say, whatever happens in Lebanon, oh, Hezbollah did it because they don't want us to evolve or to be like Dubai. That's engraved. This a mental disability for me. That's how I see it. And the only way is to uh, like change how people study in Lebanon in schools and how the media covers the news, because most of our media is funded by Saudi Arabia and Qatar and UAE, but mostly Saudi Arabia, and they are not shy about it, they say it. I think unless this changes or there's a law that prevent overseas money to journalists and people that make TV channels in Lebanon, we will remain like this, unfortunately.
This is true all over the world, Kevin. This is true all over the world. It's like a pandemic.
Yeah,
a
and
pandemic
also in
of,
Ecuador, it happened in
everywhere,
Ecuador.
man, everywhere. Like, to these people, I would just say, look at how Ukraine is doing lately, right? Look at what Zelensky has been saying lately. Unless, if you guys have nothing else to add, maybe we can move on to some other topics that have been making the news lately. Of course, we will continue to talk about Syed Hassan Nasrallah, like I said, an icon of the anti-colonial struggle, a symbol of resistance and dignity, right, across the entire world. And as you said, he was one of a handful of people who stood against genocide over the past year and a half. And
And acted against the genocide.
moving on to that, Gaza ceasefire talks, they seem to be collapsing as we speak. The second round of the ceasefire talks never really got started. The first phase is supposed to end by March 1st, so in a few days, right, by next week. Israel is up in arms about what they call the degrading rituals that the Qassam brigades have been performing with the release of the prisoners, in which we have seen, the narrative collapse. I think you said it last week, Charmaine, that when you see these captives being released essentially in pretty good shape and happy, smiley. This weekend, one of them kisses the forehead of a Qassam Brigades fighter. And, a few weeks ago, we saw this secretive smile, between one of the Israeli soldiers that was being released and another one of these fighters. The Israelis are hating this. They are hating this because it really
they've gone insane. Their bots have gone insane on social media. And under every tweet, under every post, where somebody shows evidence of, the hostages being, obviously having a decent relationship with their captors. People
or not
are
being,
screaming,
mistreated and tortured.
Exactly. They're screaming Stockholm syndrome, which is that term that describes when in captivity, the captive, because the captor is the only thing they know, they start to build an artificial relationship with them, which becomes a real thing. You know what I mean? So that they become like brainwashed by them. And the fact is, nobody's even talking about that. We're not even saying a lot could be staged, a lot could be, taken out of context, right? In these goodbyes between captive and captor. The point is, they're released healthy, okay? And the point is, when you see the way the Palestinian prisoners are released from Israeli jails, they don't even look human.
Remember, they started by putting the shirts with the Star of David, right? Like, that's what they started doing from the last prisoner exchange. So let me just finish listing
And
the
they're
reasons.
shackled on their knees. You know what I mean? Or they come out and they've got ticks and they look
have
skeletal.
scabies.
And
They need to go straight to the hospital. So Israel has still until today, as we are recording this, delayed the release of 620 Palestinian prisoners that were set to go on Saturday. There's been the main reason at this point is that the way Qassam handed over the Bibas family, right? When they did the same ceremony that they have been doing for these coffins for the bodies of this family, Israel, again, like I said, up in arms about this, saying that they're making a circus, etc. Let me just remind our viewers the way Israel handed over the corpses of hundreds of Palestinians around midway through the genocide. I think this was after they raided Nasser Hospital, and they returned them in a container without even, I don't think they were even in body bags, with no identifications, with no markings, with no way to tell who's who. And they had to be buried in a mass grave. So, it's a bit cheeky, to say the least, to be complaining about, a bunch of Qassam fighters holding a
Or- or-
coffin to hand it over to the Red Cross.
Or even how Esteban, the way the Israeli media and politicians were talking about the two Bibras kids who died.
That they were beaten to
Hamas,
death.
which Hamas said very early on that, I mean, months and months ago, right? Well before the ceasefire agreement, that your strikes killed this woman and her two children. Okay, come and collect their bodies. And Israel refused. They refused point blank. I mean, there are people who are disclosing this. I'm not talking about Hamas people or Palestinian people, foreigners who are involved in this process, who are disclosing this. So the fact that then Israel says, you murdered these children. How does Israel say this when they've killed almost 20,000 children
When you
in the
have
last year?
when you have
That's what I wanted to comment upon. Just to make people to know that Hamas, they deal with prisoners by the book. How Islam says how to deal with prisoners is that you have to treat him as you treat yourself or your kids. That's how they do it.
Real
While
Islam, not ISIS Islam, by the way.
Yeah, of course.
ISIS
Not-
Islam goes by the CIA torture playbook, not real Islam.
and not Wahhabis, the Saudis Islam. So that's one. And second, you have to know how the other side are raised and what they are taught. They are taught that that everybody who is not a Jew is subhuman. So that's is the answer of what you're talking about.
No, and look, what I wanted to add was that, as when they're talking about these kids, right, that they were beaten to death by their captors with their bare hands, they said, like you can't help but remember when all of these doctors from Doctors Without Borders and other NGOs were giving interviews just a few months ago saying there's a policy in the Israeli military establishment to do the double tap assassinations, right, on children, that we saw children with a bullet to the chest and a bullet to the head. Constantly, one after the other, like showing that this is how they are operating. So, like I said, this is beyond reproachable that Israel even has, thinks it has the moral ground to speak about degrading rituals. Today, the Israeli has apparently told the mediating countries that it's willing to release these prisoners if Hamas today returns the 4 bodies that is supposed to release this weekend, I believe. But now also Netanyahu is apparently saying that he wants all of the Israeli captives to be released in a single phase. And if this doesn't happen, they will resume intense military operations, restrict humanitarian aid distribution again, and launch attacks on Gaza City, on the refugee camps in central Gaza, and Khan Yunis. So a return to the full-blown genocide with the complete support of the United States, because didn't Trump say this over the weekend, right? That he's completely okay with Israel continuing with the ceasefire or completely collapsing it.
Trump's comments are one thing, but we have seen that twice already he's mobilized his envoy, Witkoff, to go over to the Israelis and smack some sense into them. So we'll see how things go. But I mean, it's very clear. I think it's becoming clear to Trump, if you didn't understand it already, that Netanyahu is doing everything to sabotage a second phase ceasefire agreement. The ones you named, Esteban, are perfect examples. I mean, he shifts the goalposts every single day.
Every time.
Introduces new deal terms as though they were part of the deal. These are not agreed upon. The only thing agreed upon is what is agreed upon on paper at the onset of the process, not midway. Unless there are 2 signatures on it, it's not agreed upon. Something worth mentioning, and it is this weekend we had a feature on it, was the bus bombings last Thursday in Israel. So you had a series of buses with bombs explode.
Empty buses, by the way.
Empty buses, right. These buses were generally not close to each other. These buses were generally and interestingly apart from all other buses. No group has claimed responsibility. Okay. The photo, the Israeli media released a photo of an improvised explosive device, an IED, located on a bus, which says, "Revenge for Tulkarem." According to the Israeli media, you don't see it in the picture, by the way. They tell us it says "Revenge for Tulkarem," okay, the camp in the city in the West Bank. And then what you see is, we need to put this up on the screen. It looks like the worst photoshopped IED, okay, on a background. And it says like Nasrallah, Sinwar, and I can't remember what, right? Like setting up, it's kind of like the Americans say, oh, some terrorist bomb things, and the passport is always left behind. Like people walk around with their passports. Arabs and Muslims all walk around with their passports.
Why-
When they're
and, you
blow
know-
up things, everything blows up, but the passport is fully intact.
Like 9/11.
Right. So
What do
in
you
this
write on a
case,
bomb? What is the point of writing on a bomb?
exactly. And nobody took credit. Wait, hold on. The explanation that the Israeli authorities offered as to why the bombs went off prematurely. Okay, so apparently the bombs were set for 9 a.m. The next morning, okay, for Friday morning, which would have meant maximum civilian casualties because people are out and about. They're already at work, on their way to work. Friday's the day before the Sabbath, everyone getting their groceries, maximum impact. But they went off at 9 p.m. the night before.
It was a
when
mistake.
nobody was around. The buses that exploded were separate from other buses. Nobody was on them, not even one injury. Then we hear that the Israeli security forces have arrested 2 Jewish Israelis in relation to the bombing. We don't hear much else about these people.
Exactly.
Okay?
That's what I was gonna say. That's the last thing we heard about it. Like one
It's
day,
the last thing.
one day. This was the next October 7th. The next day, nothing.
Nothing. And there's now censorship imposed on Israeli media. But what happens? What happens right away? Netanyahu gives 3 speeches in one day, okay? 3 majorly broadcast speeches in one day. And the first in which he is in Tulkarem, they take over, secure it for the prime minister to walk in and give a speech. So you're just telling us a bomb, which we never saw the writing on, saying this is revenge for Tulkarem. Netanyahu turns up hours later in Tulkarem, okay? And now a massive operation has been launched in Jenin and Tulkarem in the West Bank. So this is what happens every time people are pushing for peace. Hamas is pushing for peace. Hezbollah is pushing for peace. Iran's pushing for peace. Netanyahu diverts everyone's attention and escalates massively, okay? So people are saying, and it's fair enough, to speculate whether this was a false flag to get Netanyahu to not only distract from the Gaza ceasefire and the phase 2 pushes, because Trump gets so moved by like terrorist actions, whatever, and he can be spun that way, right? And then he shows up escalating in the West Bank, okay, sends overflights over Nasrallah's funeral in Beirut. I mean, it's just boom, 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 boom. But as I've said before, guys, I know for those of you, foundationally negative during this phase, when the enemy is so kinetic, it's because they're scared, okay? It's because they are sensing losses that we don't necessarily see because they're spinning, right? They own the narrative space and they're spinning for all they're worth. They are so kinetic, you have to wonder what is frightening them so much, okay?
But the point is, I don't know if this is the actions of Israel as an entity or personal actions from Netanyahu. If it's as an entity, I think it's fine. we should consider it positive. But Netanyahu, as we said, and even the Hebrew media, they say that he doesn't want peace or one day without problems in Israel because he will be convicted and this stuff. You know what I mean?
By the way, another point about the bus bombings, it also afforded Netanyahu an opportunity to rail against the Shin Bet and Mossad chiefs for allowing this major security lapse to take place. But we know in the weeks prior that he has sought to force the resignation of these 2 men. He cannot fire them per Israeli legalities, so he's trying to force their resignation. And conveniently, the bus attacks, it hits so many things, diversion from the ceasefire, second phase ceasefire, escalation in Tulkarem, right, in the West Bank, and going after security chiefs in Israel that Netanyahu wants sacked. We know this from a number of weeks ago. He doesn't want them involved in the phase 2 ceasefire talks. Both these men were heavily involved in the phase 1 ceasefire talks. So the false flag potentially solved a lot of his problems. But, I think the Hebrew media last week, and we're going to pick up on this theme, I think next week at the Cradle, they invoked a very, very interesting phase about how Netanyahu is now trying to stack not just the cabinet, but all major administrative posts, all security posts, all, important posts in Israel to serve the king rather than the kingdom. And when you hear this, you really understand fully what Netanyahu's about. He thinks he's King David. I mean, King Bibi, all right? You got to serve Bibi, not Israel. But what he's actually doing is making it very possible for his enemies or those allies who are getting tired of being run around by Netanyahu, okay, and puppeteered by Netanyahu, to get him axed, because they can deal with Israel and they can support in Israel, but it's increasingly more difficult and more difficult to deal with Netanyahu. So by making himself king in such an obvious way, he is also putting a big target on his back because, yeah.
I just want to mention something for our viewers who don't know how to read Arabic. On the photo that the Hebrew media released, you can read Sonwar. It's written in a different way, and as if you're writing Karis, not Karim. Yeah, it's very different. It's not like mishandwriting. No, it's worth mentioning.
Yeah, which makes people think that these are not native Arabic speakers who wrote those words on the explosive device. So there are so many hints, which I think it's interesting because initially, even before bombs were going off, news was coming out and the news was unfiltered, right? And now there's a complete censorship of all news related to the bus bombings. Netanyahu achieved what he wanted with them, wants to sweep it under the rug and move on and escalate in other directions.
So, let's talk a bit about what he achieved, because as you said, Sharmeen, the day after, right, he goes into Tulkarm camp, he goes into a Palestinian home that has been raided, and gives the order to intensify operations. And this was like the third day in a row that the Israeli government or a high government official gave orders to intensify operations in the West Bank, which have been ongoing as of today for 35 days straight. In Tulkarm, in Nablus, in Jenin, where the refugee camp has been completely emptied. You're talking about tens of thousands of people displaced. You're seeing for the first time since the second Intifada, tanks are rolling into the occupied West Bank. And yesterday, the Israeli Defense Minister Israel Katz said that troops will remain in the Jenin camp, he said, will remain in the area's urban hotspots, the area being the West Bank, for the coming year, for at least a year. And, you're talking about 40,000 people displaced for Jenin camp. What does that mean? They can return home for at least a year, and it's going to be longer, right? And at the same time, the Gaza, the general's plan is tried to be reinstituted inside Gaza. Are they counting on people just essentially being tired of this topic and not caring anymore, or like what is the game plan here, right? Because they are going for full extermination.
Trump was just talking trash when he came up with his plan. And then went, no, I mean, basically has gone, no, you don't like it. Okay, it's not a big deal. It was just an idea. I mean, that's basically what he's saying now. So the thing is, it's also how he sort of pre-negotiates, right? He sort of threatens and frightens everybody and gets them to calm down a few rungs in their demands, right? So, but what he's managed to do in this, that I've argued before, is that he's also managed to galvanize heavily momentum in Arab capitals who don't give a shit about Palestine, okay? Not really, meaning in Jordan and Egypt. Egypt has now come up with its own plan for Gaza. They had 15 months of war to come up with a plan. They didn't, but Trump says one word about moving like 2 million Palestinians into Egypt, and all of a sudden Egypt's got a plan. And Egypt's plan, as with every single other Arab plan that will come in the aftermath of Trump's silly statements, will involve the reconstruction of Gaza. It has backfired. They want to make sure it's reconstructed so Palestinians will live there. And so that impetus has absolutely grown in the Arab camp, whereas maybe they wouldn't have cared so much if Palestinians lived in 10 cities for a generation or two to come. Now they really care a lot about it because they don't want them to be displaced into their towns and cities.
What do you think, Karim?
Yeah, as Sharmin said, يعني, let's us not forget that Trump said that Sisi is his favorite dictator in the world. He said this. And let's not forget that in Egypt, the only entity that is allowed to make constructions and these stuff is the army. So the army will benefit from this. And I think regarding security, I don't think it's secure or it's feasible for Hamas that the Egyptian army will rebuild Gaza because they will know everything, what's under the grounds or and maybe the materials that that they will use. And I think Sisi usually gives everything for the army because he wants loyalty, and the only thing that the only way he can gain loyalty is through bribery and money, because he's not that leader that people will follow him because of his actions and his words. They will follow him because of the money,
Like he
and I
pays.
think that's what he wants to gain. He wants to be involved because the money will pour in from the Gulf countries, and his army will work, and they will get money. That's my thoughts till now.
So I want to add something about the situation in the West Bank. We were just talking about that Israel is holding up the release of 620 Palestinian prisoners for the Gaza ceasefire. And today, the Palestinian Prisoners Club said that just over the past few days, Israel has arrested 365 Palestinians from Jenin and Tulkarem. So more than half of the number of Palestinians that are said to be released in this latest phase that Israel is holding up, right? So it really just becomes this rotating door, the Israeli prisons, which has been the case for decades at this point. So, I think that they're also destroying infrastructure. They're tearing up streets. They're tearing up, water pipes, etc. in the West Bank. The same strategy as in Gaza, but somehow with a lot more silence than we saw when it was
Yeah,
happening.
because let us not forget that the PA are the ones who control the West Bank, and they already had decades to silence many people, including يعني famous people like Nizar Banad and others. And let's not forget that many people that are in the prisons were captured by the PA and handed over to the Israelis. So
The
I think
PA cracked
in this
down
sense,
on a demonstration yesterday of
yeah,
mourners
100%.
for Hassan Nasrallah, and they cracked down on
Yeah.
them.
Yesterday there was like a natural demonstration in the West Bank regarding the funeral of Sayyid Hassan Nasrallah, and the PA came over and they like punched a bunch of people. So I think that's why we don't hear about it. Everything is already under control in somehow under control through the PA. And we know it's the best way. And as I often say, that you control other people by their oppressors, and you control the oppressors. So that's what's going on in West Bank since Arafat signed the stupid deal in 1994.
I want to also mention that yesterday, same day of the funeral, Benjamin Netanyahu demanded the complete demilitarization of southern Syria
I was gonna go there. I
and
wanted to get your thoughts.
warned the new Syrian government run by Al-Qaeda that it will not be allowed to deploy any forces south of Damascus, okay?
Yeah, we need to put up a map so
Literally,
people can see what it means to be south of Damascus. You talk
yeah,
about a
yeah.
huge chunk of the country.
We demand the complete demilitarization of southern Syria, said the Israeli prime minister. I mean, who has no sovereignty over
It's
Syria
funny
whatsoever.
because in his statement, Netanyahu really is kind of like the only Western leader to still, call this an HTS government, a Hayat Tahrir al-Sham. He's like all of a sudden up in arms, like, oh my God, look at these Al Qaeda terrorists. They're like on our borders.
I know. So, again, what I'm saying, why is Netanyahu so kinetic? Why is there that much energy coming out of Israel where you'd think they'd want to tread water, get things done more quietly, okay, secure themselves,
Economy.
work on the economy, re-inject confidence in its population. Instead, they're making loud, combative, malign statements every single day. What is going on? Like this is in the end counterproductive to their own psychology, the psychology of Israelis and their view of security. Now, what his statements yesterday, Netanyahu's statements yesterday about demilitarizing all of, basically southern Syria is ours, south of Damascus is ours, okay? He mobilized Syrian tribes in southern Syria today to reject what they called the aggressive statements of the Israeli prime minister. We, the sons of the clans of southern Syria, follow with full awareness and responsibility the aggressive statements issued by Netanyahu, which target the unity of Syria, its land and people, and seek to spread discord among its components. It rejected, the statement of the tribes rejected any form of Zionist interference in Syrian affairs, affirmed their loyalty to a unified Syrian state, and calling for national security, national solidarity among all components of Syria, of the Syrian people. And they stressed full Syrian sovereignty over all its territories, including the occupied Golan, which Abu Muhammad al-Jalani, okay, aka Ahmad Shara, the self-declared president of the transitional government in Damascus, has not resisted. He has not resisted, right? The Cradle published, I think it went quite viral, the map, the new map of Syria published by the new Syrian government, which just excludes, the Golan, like it was never Syrian territory. It seems like the Syrian state is now aligned with the Israeli prime minister in viewing southern Syria as sovereign Israeli territory. But
Just I want to comment on something very quickly that I listened to a podcast for Julani or Shari or whatever you name him, one of his like hundreds of podcasts in the recent month. So in this podcast, he referred to Israel as he said our neighbor, the neighboring Israeli state. Just to let people know that Joseph On, the one who like we talk about, he refers to Israel as the enemy or the enemy
Lebanese
entity.
president.
Yeah, the
Yeah.
Lebanese president, but Al-Sharia, he said our neighbor, the state of Israel. This is for the Arabic word, yani, you know where you're going from these expressions.
I have to say, so at the same time that the tribes made the statement, their protests erupted in Quneitra, which is the
Quneitra.
southernmost governor in Syria. It's kind of like, this is why I'm saying, like, why is that side? Why is the side of oppression and hegemony and colonialism, imperialism, and slavery, okay? Why is that side being so kinetic when I feel like they almost think if they make enough statements, people will just fold. But what they're not seeing is that they're provoking people. When you provoke people and give them a sense that they have nothing to lose, they react. So in fact, reactions are taking place all across this region every day because we're being provoked every day. And as they are being kinetic, as I say many times on the podcast, for every action there is a reaction. Their actions are invoking a reaction. And yesterday, the overflights created the best reactions of the day, okay? Twice, not once, but twice. And the statement about Syria is inflaming nationalist Arabs all over the Arab world and Muslims all over. What are they doing? This need to create momentum is going to backfire.
Yeah, before we finish, I just want to comment that you said for every action there's a reaction. Maybe for the long term, you know how the Israelis act and think they might like force some people who are with Julani or whatever, or the people that already were in their hospitals during the World War on Syria. Maybe people will commit massacres or kill people in the south that will force these people, especially the Druze, to seek refuge to North Israel or to their relatives that are under the Israeli occupation. I think we might see such a thing in like a short time.
Listen,
Maybe.
what happens in the short term? I mean, when Damascus fell, there was a sense that it was absolute, and Ahmed al-Shara put on a suit and met with world leaders and Arab leaders and Muslim leaders and Western leaders, and there was like, again, a sense of momentum. There were pictures and visuals and statements every day. But, fast forward a few months, and Syria is like broke AF. Their access to electricity, water, basic goods is getting worse and worse all the time. All the meetings with all these leaders haven't provided anything. It just seems to me it's like when a business is going out of steam and they're trying to keep investor confidence. They make a lot of statements, but in the end, you're bankrupt. You know,
It's
so
Ukraine 2.0.
but it's Ukraine too.
Except if he monetized his podcasts.
Yeah, right. But I mean, we're seeing that sense of bankruptcy existing in Syria and the new Syria today. We're seeing that sense of bankruptcy with Zelensky in Ukraine, you know, trying to make statements, trying to galvanize support when the tide is absolutely against him being able to sabotage a U.S.-Russian deal that will give Russia the territory it wants and basically makes a rump state out of Ukraine. And then you're seeing that same sense in Israel, because don't forget what's happening with Netanyahu's escalations everywhere is he's directing massive amount of state resources to military and force and not to the economy that is absolutely floundered since October 7th. Okay.
And massive amounts of U.S. taxpayer dollars as well, right? Like you're talking about
Of course, but what I'm saying is essentially in these three theaters, they're being bankrupted, but they're sounding bigger and stronger than ever, right? They're not letting a moment pass, trying to keep that momentum. It's all smoke and mirrors. These are three countries that don't have the means to continue as normal states if they stopped today.
True. True indeed. So I think unless you guys have anything else to add, we can at this episode here. We want to thank everyone for joining us, for tuning in. Please make sure to share, to like, to subscribe, to follow us on Telegram, on X, and to find us on Patreon. You can find the link in the comments below, where you can become a supporter for the Cradle. We survive thanks to your support. So to everyone who's already subscribed, we want to thank you. For the Cradle News Roundup, my name is Esteban Carrillo. I have been joined by Karim Shami and Sharmeen Narwani. No arguments this episode.
Yeah, well, we beat down Karim last time. He saw a statement from Trump afterwards, backing down, saying,
No. There was
you're-
nothing to argue about, Sharmeen.
True.
No, but
I
you
can't
could have
argue.
You could have come back on the same argument, but you saw a statement.
No.
You showed me the
I
statement.
did it. I showed you the statement. This is number
Yeah.
one. And second, I was not saying, and I said it twice last time. I didn't say this will happen. I am saying that people should not give credit to Sisi because he will do it if he's forced to.
He won't do it. He won't do it.
طيب.
See, I'm
خلاص.
a
Stop the
CC.
recording.
I will close.
Play it upload.
All right, bye.
Stop.